New NBA Plus Stuff podcast in the description. Spoke on the Washington Wizards and their potential playoff chances if they could pull off a round one upset. And then I spoke on my most anticipated video games of 2018. So among all the great things that are happening for the Houston Rockets this season, one of them is Clint Capela and his ability to just fit in with their team really well as a rim-running center who just worries about grabbing rebounds and not doing too many things, unlike Dwight Howard before him. The problem is that Capela's a restricted free agent. He fits the template of what a lot of teams want in their center nowadays, and the Houston Rockets have to re-sign Chris Paul. So if someone throws a whole lot of money at Capela in free agency this offseason, there's a chance that he could be gone from the Rockets. And a very interesting thing arises now, which is, number one, what is he worth for Houston? What is he worth to a different team? And, is it worth it? Now, is he worth it from a basketball standpoint? 100% he is. If you're Houston, are you willing to give him, $17, $18 million a year if someone matches that for him? Daryl Morey seems like the type of an owner who is all about winning, and this Rockets team is really damn good with Clint Capela, James Harden, and Chris Paul. So if you have to make yourself obscenely expensive in order to maintain that, then I think you go for it. But maybe there is some sort of a cutoff, and maybe some other team is willing to give Capela just a bit more than Houston is totally comfortable with. And even if that's not the case, but someone still throws a bunch of money at him, if anything, just to force Houston's hand to re-sign him for a lot of money, then that could hinder the Rockets' ability to make moves in the future. So we'll see what happens. Next up is Will Barton of the Denver Nuggets. By the way, you're going to see the Rockets like 14 times in this video, whether it's because a player I'm talking about is on their team or they're the other team. Will Barton can put up points. And similar to the Rockets, the Nuggets are over the salary cap, unless Wilson Chandler and Darrell Arthur decline their player options, which I doubt is going to happen. And Denver is a very good offensive team, and Barton is just another piece in that puzzle, right? With Gary Harris and Jokic and Murray and all that. But teams need guys who can put points up. Teams could also use guys who can come off the bench and put up said points. See the impact that Eric Gordon makes for the Rockets, because I can't shut up about them apparently. I think it's a fair thing to expect that someone could promise Will Barton maybe a starting role that he has not been able to get with these Denver Nuggets. Well, somewhat. He started about half this season. But if someone promises him a starting role, and if that someone just needs a player who can put some points up, well, Barton's your guy. And the one thing that I forgot to mention is the Nuggets have to deal with Jokic's contract being up after this season, which only makes this thing all the more interesting. I think there's a decent chance that Will Barton is not on the Denver Nuggets next season. Next up, we have another restricted free agent. Those are always fun. Zach LaVine of the Chicago Bulls. A kind of similar situation to Barton, a team that would be looking for some offense. And after the initial crop of, someone like a Barton is gone, I think a Zach LaVine could be in the conversation. Chicago needs to ask themselves how good he really is. Also, can he fit in with the rest of the team? Because I think it's a fair question to ask if he and Chris Dunn can really coexist as your backcourt. Because the one thing is LaVine, I think he's someone who prefers to have the ball in his hands, which is kind of similar to Chris Dunn, and you could argue that Chris Dunn needs the ball in his hands because he's not that good of a shooter. But at the same time, I also think, defensively, Dunn makes up for a lot of LaVine's problems. I don't know, it's an interesting conversation. The other thing is LaVine's injury history. He missed the beginning of this season with some lower body stuff, and he missed the end of this season with some lower body stuff. So maybe there's some other team out there who just likes him and is a bit more confident in his health than Chicago potentially is. I'm not on the inside. I don't know. But I do think there's someone who could be willing to take a chance and pay a little bit extra for LaVine this offseason. here's the Houston Rockets again. Jabari Parker is in a similar boat with LaVine, but I think his is a bit more interesting. Also, I don't know if he can dunk on Clint Capela like that, and me bigging up Capela earlier in the video looks a little silly now because Jabari Parker just buried him. But anyway, if I can get that nonsense out of the way. The thing with Jabari is I think the Bucks need him, and I've said this many times, because he's a 20-plus point scorer. He's got that kind of potential at least, right? But he's had the injuries. He is not a good defensive player. And, I mean, the Bucks have some roster problems, if you ask me. They really need a center, for one, because Thonmaker didn't exactly pan out this previous season, or this current season, I guess. And if you commit a whole lot of money to Jabari because you want to hold on to his potential and the fit that he could have with Giannis, that might leave you with not enough cap space, resources, what have you, to make a move for just a center. As far as who the big man would be, I don't know. But then also after next season, you have Eric Bledsoe's contract, which is going to be up. So if you are forced to commit a bit of money to keeping Jabari, you might be pretty swamped for cash if you're just going to re-sign the guys you have, which you could argue they probably should not do given their situation. A lot of different options the Bucks can go in. Personally, I think getting a head coach would be the number one thing. But we'll just have to see what happens, man. Jabari has a lot of scoring potential, and I'm sure a lot of teams see that. Back to the Rockets once again. They have another free agent they got to talk about, and that's Trevor Ariza. If we had to prioritize Houston's expiring contracts, Chris Paul is number 1, Capela is number 2, I would say Ariza is number 3. Part of this is because you signed PJ Tucker, you signed Luke Richard and Mbamute, and while those guys are not as good of shooters as Ariza is, I would say they're better defensive players, because Ariza, I've always felt like he's a little inconsistent as a defender. Like, there are some nights when he looks like a lockdown guy, and there are other nights when it's kind of not so good. But he fits into this Rockets team very well, right? But I think you're a little more expendable at those positions, whereas Chris Paul, Capela, and James Harden, I mean, what is that stat? They've lost like 2 games total when all 3 of those guys are in there. So clearly they're more important than Trevor Ariza. He's the type of player that a lot of teams would like to have. He's a wing, he can defend multiple positions, and he makes open three-pointers. Now, does anyone else have James Harden and Chris Paul? No, so they're not going to be able to generate the open looks for him that he's been able to get on this team, but I think he can still be a decent enough piece of a roster, and given everything else the Rockets have to deal with this offseason, Ariza might not be there too much longer, so he's a name to look for. And then once again, new podcast, Washington Wizards playoff chances, anticipated games of 2018, and I'm done.